get that strategy? Especially if you don't have the resources in place for a full-time hire. So how do you actually do it if you're not ready financially or commitment-wise to invest in a full-time C-suite? So maybe you're not ready to hire a full-time CMO or CFO or CEO, but how do you actually do it? How do you get that support when you're not ready yet? So, thankfully, there are some really cool and interesting leadership models that are emerging and also ones that already exist. So interim, we've always really had interim, but interim is quite ideal for short-term cover. Tends to be more of like a full-time role most of the time. We also have consultancies, which is more external. But the thing that is new on the scene is fractional. So fractional is really starting to see its heyday. It's not a model that really existed before and is now really kind of thriving. But many people don't know what it is or what it looks like. So we're going to talk today about that fractional model. So fractional models are massively increasing, I think because of quite a lot of reasons that are happening in the market and in the ecosystem that make it kind of the perfect time for fractional. So the flexible work culture, during COVID we worked remotely, and now, we might be back in the office 1 or 2 days a week, but very few companies are back full time. So the fractional model works really well in this more flexible ecosystem because it's a more flexible model than, say, interim or consultancy. You also have a lot of increased pressures on businesses with rising costs, both of salaries, as we've seen in the last 3 years, but also from inflation. So, you've got rising costs on both sides, you've got pressure to get healthier profit margins, and that then means that you have to think flexibly and creatively about how you might get that senior level leadership and whether or not your company can actually hire a full-time CMO or CFO or CTO at this point. Quite interestingly, actually, I found this stat when I was preparing this presentation, and there's a massive rise both in the US, where it's a little bit more hotter, but also in the UK and Europe in fractional roles. So there's a rise in companies adopting fractional executives by 25% in the US, which is going to grow to 35% in 2025, and 20% in Europe, which is going to rise to 30%. So we're seeing this really interesting growth at the moment in the market around the fractional model and fractional executives. Fractional leadership is especially ideal in scaling stages. So at that point where you now realize the value of having strategy before you jump into execution, but you're maybe not quite established enough to take on a full-time C-suite role. So fractional kind of hits this really nice sweet spot where they're in-house enough to be and understand the business, but they're external enough because they're still working with other clients, they're still part of the market, that they have that external perspective. So it's kind of the perfect middle ground between an interim, who's only normally working just for you, full-time most of the time hire, but for a shorter period, and consultancy, which is external, which doesn't get underneath the skin most of the time, as an internal employee does. So fractional kind of sits in that perfect little sweet spot right in the middle there. A lot of people ask this question, so when I tell them I'm a fractional CMO, they go, what is fractional? So fractional, the key's in the name actually, is a fraction of a C-suite's time. So rather than having a full-time CFO or CMO, you have a fraction of their time throughout the week. So normally it's a couple of days, but that's spread across a week, it's spread across a month, and that way you feel like you have the support, but you don't have a full-time person either. So it's a fraction of an executive's time is probably the most simplest way to explain what a fractional executive is and what they do a little bit.